Hi there, I'm Kyle Kittleson with MedCircle, joined today with Dr. Ramani. Dr. Ramani, so good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We're talking about PMDD, and this has actually been requested by many MedCircle members. What is premenstrual dysphoric disorder?
So, premenstrual dysphoric disorder is a mood disorder. It's a set of mood symptoms that occur for women who have their depressive symptoms at the time of their menstrual cycle.
Mm,
So what we see is that the onset of symptoms take place at what's called the late luteal phase. So sort of the 5 days prior to the onset of menses. And at that time, you'll see a mood presentation that's much more characterized by more of an irritable, angry, labile, like moods kind of all over the place style. Some people will really report a sense of wanting to be socially isolated. They may report tremendous fatigue, problems with concentration. But where it gets tricky is that these symptoms really only ramp up before the menstrual cycle, and then a day or two after the person's menstrual period starts, then the symptoms dissipate. Because a traditional major depressive episode requires 2 weeks of symptoms or longer, PMDD doesn't meet that bar, right? It's usually about anywhere from 4 to 6, 7 days on the long end of how long those symptoms will last. So it never met that bar, but yet some people were reporting significant debilitation from having that level of symptoms every month. What becomes very important is to track the symptoms and see if they're lined up with the menstrual cycle. So there's a certain we'll track this for many menstrual cycles to make sure that these two things are happening in lockstep, that these sorts of unique mood symptoms plus physical changes. People will report feeling bloated, they'll report breast tenderness, lots of muscle tension, sometimes headaches. So there'll be physical symptoms that go along with it too. So for people who are experiencing PMDD, you'll see both the physical symptomatology and the psychological symptomatology, but the mood symptoms, again, characterized much more by anger, irritability, lability, and an uptick in interpersonal conflicts. So they find themselves getting into almost like they have a shorter fuse and getting into more arguments and that kind of thing.
Let's go through the symptoms a little more in depth. My understanding that there's 11 of them. Could we go through them one by one?
So we see that as, again, we go into that late luteal phase, the days before the menstrual period starts, is that you'll see changes in mood. So the person for most of the month was doing just fine. And listen, the kind of stereotypical depiction of it is a person who cries very easily to a very minimal stimulus. Someone's telling a sad story, they start to cry. They see something sad on TV, they start to cry, and they'll say, "Oh, it must be my period," kind of thing. But those mood changes are much more. It's not just crying at one thing; they're much more pronounced, and the person will feel like, "What the heck?" And I'm sliding into this sadness or irritability. That's not how I was even last week. So it's a change. It's a change from where they were typically in these time period, the period beforehand.
And when you talk about the symptoms of irritability, anger, or an uptick in interpersonal conflicts, what separates that symptom from women who are just going to be a little more irritable during this time?
Because it's the pervasiveness of it, Kyle. It's almost every single menstrual cycle, right? And it's
Mm,
pretty significant. It represents a pretty significant change for them. So much so, and remember, this is always the ringer for all mental illnesses, that it's causing them social and occupational impairment.
right.
Right? So this kind of irritability, this kind of anger, this kind of conflict is causing maybe problems in their primary relationship, whether that's a marriage or a long-term relationship. So it's causing problems there. It could be causing problems within their entire family system. It may have caused them problems at work. It may have ended friendships. So it's so much so that it's destabilizing what's going around them on around them. So because it happens every month, it's happening consistently.
So we have nine more symptoms to go through. The first one was mood changes. The second one was irritability or an uptick in interpersonal conflicts. Are there any physical symptoms?
Yeah, absolutely. What you see are the physical symptoms that are associated with the hormonal changes that happen during the time of menses. Those tend to be breast tenderness, a feeling of bloating, and sort of a sense of weight gain. You might see headaches, muscle tension, and fatigue. Those are
Okay,
the
so but and forgive me, this is maybe I'm not the best person to be doing this interview, but the doesn't that happen during normal? No. Okay.
it's a continuum, right? So I can say this as well. Now I'm very menopausal, probably too TMI for all the med circle folks, but yes, I am. And so, but the fact of the matter is that there's a continuum of response. Some women at the time, and again, I'm being very careful in how I'm describing that. I'd say female, any person
Sure.
whose biology results in them having a menstrual period, because I really want to be respectful to all gender identity. So when a person is having their menstrual the period when that's coming up, I would say the majority of people feel some level of discomfort, right? Everyone will feel something. At a minimum, there'll be some bloating, right? There's fluid
Okay.
retention at that time. It's about severity. It's the point where the breast tenderness or the sort of the whole body discomfort or the cramping or any of that is, or I should say the water retention is so uncomfortable that it's actually leaving a person feeling like, I need to sleep, I need to rest, I'm so fatigued, I'm physically uncomfortable, I can't go to work, I can't do the things I need to do day by day. So as in all things mental health, it's all a continuum. Yes,
Yes.
that symptomatology is normal at that time of each cycle for anyone, but at the end of the day, it's really about how debilitating it is, how consistent. And what we see with PMDD is those physical symptoms are also quite exacerbated alongside the psychological symptoms.
A lot of these symptoms, I'm looking at a list here: anxiety and tension, lack of interest in people, difficulty concentrating, fatigue or lack of energy, appetite changes. Those all sound like depressive symptoms to
They are
me.
depressive symptoms.
Yes. So is the difference here that they occur during the specific time? That's it.
It's all about the timing. Is
Okay.
that every month or 10 months out of 12? We look at it happening in the majority of menstrual cycles over like a 6, 9 month period, that gets tracked. It's important. And you might be saying, well, what difference does it make? You're depressed, you're depressed. Does it really matter that it's happening at your period? Yes, it does, because the treatment will vary.
Mm,
What has been shown in the research is that oral contraceptives are considered to be sort of the treatment of choice. And for the majority of people who can tolerate oral contraceptives, it works, and the dysphoric symptoms lift. The challenge is that not everybody can tolerate them, and that starts getting to be a bit more complicated. And people would have to work with, honestly, with their gynecologist and perhaps even a psychiatrist who specializes in female health to understand what would work best for them in their particular case. So, what other
mhm.
kinds of hormonal approaches, because this is hormonal. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is an incredibly controversial diagnosis when it entered the DSM-5. Many people who work in the areas of feminist psychology are saying, okay, you're just now you're diagnosing a woman for having a woman's body. And it was a very, very fair critique, one that I remain aware of, because there are sort of socio-political ramifications. If this idea that, well, every month a woman has a menstrual period and every month for 4 to 6 days she's going to be shot, do we want her in a highly sensitive profession? Would that lead to, a sort of discrimination against women and the assumption that they'd be having this mental health crisis each month? In the wrong hands, those interpretations could be made. They also played upon existing sort of assumptions about women or people who have biological physiology that results to a menstrual cycle, about women are moody, it would happen in workplace settings. Oh, she's just being difficult, she's on her period, which could
Mhm.
actually diminish that person's power in the workplace. It could be used sort of unfairly in interpersonal conflicts at home. So there's a lot, it's a lot heavier than just the symptomatology, and it speaks to sort of the politics and the social ramifications of using a label. Now, I'm going to be cynical too for a minute. In some ways, having a label means you get a diagnostic code, you get a diagnostic code, you get a treatment, and then all of a sudden you can say, this is now coded. We can prescribe oral contraceptives and the way insurance works, okay, that's the appropriate diagnosis. So part of this is also being driven by market causes, but it is a real phenomenon. And for people, it's pretty small percentage. People might be thinking, well, if every woman goes through this, is a 90% of women have PMDD, not by a long shot. The level of severity we need to see of these mood symptoms and the consistency almost every single menstrual cycle is actually not observed. And most people get through these days of the month, and that's not their fault, but they get through. It's not causing that much disruption. I think that because this is a new diagnosis, the numbers are still coming in, but my understanding of the epidemiology of this sits someplace around maybe 2 to 5%. So it's pretty small. It's a small percentage. And obviously, once a person hits perimenopause and menopause, the symptomatology will then fade.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Encina Severa, who was diagnosed with PMDD, among some other mental health conditions. She sat down with me and MedCircle to talk about those conditions. Here's an inside look into what she had to say about living with PMDD. When your depression is at its worst, what does your day look like?
Almost in a panic. And the first thing that I do is I reach out to people, to anybody and everybody, people that I don't talk to anymore, friends, family. Like, I try to build a good circle of people that I can go to, because, I mean, everybody needs a connection. Everybody needs people that they can depend on. And without that, you're missing a very, very important, like, human aspect part that everybody needs to grow.
I think that some people wonder, how do I know that this is PMDD and it's not major depressive disorder? Like, how do I differentiate? Because I think that's really important to know, because treatment's going to be a little bit different, right?
Cool.
I think there are people out there who have PMDD who find themselves destabilized by those 5 to 7 days of the month and may go into therapy to address other downstream effects of that or other issues they want to talk about. But once a person recognizes it's PMDD, and if they're fortunate enough that they could tolerate oral contraceptives and that kind of gets them on an even keel, they're kind of off to the races. They're good and they understand what's happening. That's different than a major depressive episode, which may or may not be. In fact, it won't be necessarily. It's just, I guess you have a 1 in 4 shot that it's going to be associated with a person's menstrual period, because that's going to happen about every 4 to 5 weeks. And so what we're looking for is the length of the episode. So a major depressive episode has to be at least 2 weeks long, at least 2 weeks long. Okay. And on average, a major depressive episode lasts somewhere between 3 and 6 months. Okay. So 2 weeks is the minimum. And so if a person's saying, gosh, 8 to 12 times a year during my menses, the symptomatology is coming up, that's obviously very different than the person who says, I had a major depressive episode that lasted for 3 months. Well, obviously I had 3 menstrual cycles in that period of depression, but I had the depressive symptoms regardless of whether my period was coming or not. And so that's the main way that you understand the difference. And the treatment's going to be different. A person who's living with major depressive episode or major depressive disorder, the research shows that they'll benefit from cognitive behavioral therapy, in some cases from medication along with that, other therapies like psychotherapy. There's different models that work. In the case of PMDD, to just treat the PMDD without some sort of hormonal fix is going to be a little bit tricky. One thing that women or anyone who's having a menstrual cycle would know is that I keep a calendar, and people who have PMDD are very carefully told, keep a calendar so you know when, as the symptoms are going to come up, you might plan your life accordingly, to maybe that those are days you might, if you have any control over your work schedule or the kind of help you have in the household or something. But honestly, addressing it hormonally and maybe enhancing it with therapy, by and large, it works.
So my understanding then from that is somebody could have a co-occurring disorder of PMDD and depression, and they would treat both, but they would treat both differently.
Yes. So when a person has co-occurring PMDD and major depressive disorder, it starts to get tricky. What you're going to look for is, are there the presence of depressive symptoms or episodes at times that meet that time criteria, at least 2 weeks, that are not contiguous to menstrual cycles, right? You'd have to establish that. And yes, you could conceivably have both. And in which case, the depressive episodes would be treated however they're treated. And then there'd be consideration of also addressing the premenstrual dysphoria. In addition, PMDD can also co-locate with a whole bunch of other mental health issues, including anxiety disorders, all the other stuff that hangs out with all the other stuff that hangs out with depression. It could be seen in people with personality disorders, et cetera, et cetera. It gets complicated if a person doesn't have regular periods too. And that could be also generated by certain eating disorders, especially anorexia nervosa, where there can be a disruption or an interruption or irregularity in menstrual cycles, or even in bulimia nervosa. So all of these things have to be managed and carefully watched. And obviously the care should be overseen by both the patient's gynecologist and a mental health practitioner in an ideal world.
Now, is PMDD able to come about later in life, or is it something that is typically standard throughout a woman's life?
Typically, it's something that does onset earlier. So you'll start seeing it onset earlier. And then unless a person gets treated, it could actually persist throughout their adult lives. There is also some belief that people who have PMDD may be a little bit more vulnerable to postpartum depression. That's why it's so critical for it to get diagnosed and worked up. And if a person knows they have PMDD, then they can work more collaboratively with their gynecologist and with a mental health practitioner to monitor postpartum mood symptomatology as well.
Understood. Well, this has been incredibly insightful, and I want to make sure that we need to do a full series on PMDD. We're getting enough insight, we're getting enough requests about it. If you ever have a topic that you like MedCircle to cover, please email support@medcircle.com. But PMDD, we got to do a series on this because this is really important. Thank you for talking about this, Dr. Ramani, and I look forward to seeing you tonight along with our other doctors. You can register for tonight's live virtual panel using the links below. And if you would like to become a MedCircle member, please do. You get a whole week for free. We have lots of discounts for professionals, military, healthcare workers, students, teachers. We got them. We got discounts for everybody. Email support@medcircle.com. We will set you up. I'm Kyle Kittleson. Remember, whatever you're going through, you got this.